So in singing, sometimes when we're talking about musical phrasing, especially in opera, but also in art song interpretation, you'll hear this phrase that breath is thought, is breath is thought, is breath is thought. AKA a musical phrase or the poetic interpretation of the lyric and how it's being text painted in the music should be influenced by the thought that you as the character or the singer or the speaker of the poem or the song or whatever, as that thought is being rendered, or as you as in that characterization want to render it, right? So my Ophelia could technically take a breath if it's not in between a word or if it's not in an inappropriate musical place, in a different moment than another Ophélie or something like that. And look, some of that is definitely going to be dictated by what ornamentation you're taking and what your physical and technical breath capacity is. So that's something that I find myself thinking a lot about when I'm analyzing a text or working with a new score. Breath is thought, is breath is thought, is breath is thought. Am I breathing in a place that psychologically, emotionally makes sense when my character actually stopped there? And the funny thing is, I think this is especially true of like big Wagnerian singers when they go sing lighter music. I remember someone talking about this watching Bryn Terfel record a Rodgers and Hammerstein album. He's like this big baritone and he's used to singing these like long Wagnerian or like Italianate phrases, and he's like singing these lovely but somewhat simpler songs, and his breath capacity was like too much. They actually had to ask him to breathe more often because they're like, it just doesn't make sense to sing all of these phrases in one long breath, because no one would actually say all that in one long breath. It wasn't the dramatic intention. And so, sometimes, depending on the form, you actually should breathe more. And that's always been interesting to me as I've gotten older, thinking about being able to take more breaths to be more expressive rather than just showing I can make it through a 4 or a 5 or a 6 bar phrase, which when we're younger, we're always, like manically working towards. But I think about this a lot in life because, that should be true too when we're just talking, that our breath in activity or our breath in conversation should be reflective and tied to our thought, right? And, the breath is so revelatory about what's actually happening in the nervous system. So this has been a real, I've had some, I've had to evolve in how I thought about this because, I think for many years coming out of a lot of yoga and singing and Alexander and even meditation, certain schools of meditation, the thought was, oh, well, a deeper, longer, lower breath is always inherently better. And actually, the truth is you want the breath to be supportive of that which you're doing. There's schools in classical singing that you should only breathe through your nose or you should only breathe through your mouth. And, I went through a phase where I was only breathing, through my nose for so long. And then, people like, but no, you can get a quicker, more efficient, more appropriate breath when you actually breathe through your mouth. If you're breathing only through your nose when you sing, sometimes those inhales are so quick that it actually causes tension in the neck and the other finer musculature. And I had to learn the hard way that is in fact true in my 20s, right? But generally speaking, walking around, sleeping, at rest, for speaking, breathing through the nose is more efficient for you. It's cleaner for you. There's all the books on breath that have come out in the past 5 to 10 years that affirm this, corroborate this. But yeah, we really want the breath to be adaptive, just like we ourselves want to be adaptive, right? So in meditation, in Vedic meditation, we're putting ourselves into a hypometabolic state in which the body goes into actually a slightly, it's a state of deep relaxation. But some of the hallmarks of that physiologically are lower heart rate, less breath consumption, and actually lowered metabolism, which allows the body to feel safe enough to start to go into like stress clean out mode. But that lower breath consumption, because we're not doing anything really, we're sitting here in a wakeful state that's deeply relaxing, we don't need a lot of breath. And actually then the body can start to work through, as I've mentioned elsewhere, the old stagnant air that's already in the body that we haven't been exhaling due to stress, due to tension and all of that that's held in the body, keeping old breath not fully released. But with that said, sometimes in meditation circles, then or depending on, where you are, any kind of circle, you'll hear opinions about all of the modern obsession with breathwork. Now, granted, breathwork runs the gamut from slow and deep and yogic and, like age-old pranayama to much more, quote, modern breathwork that a lot of it can look like it is a form of controlled hyperventilation, right? A lot more upward breath in through the mouth. The expansion is not so much into the intercostals, it's into, like the auxiliary ribs up here. Suffice to say, I used to feel like, oh, there is no value to that. All you're doing is hyperventilating. You're taking in too much oxygen. That oxygen causes oxidative stress, and that leads to inflammation. And that's what we're trying to avoid with regular meditation and all these other things, and eating antioxidants and eating healthy. So why would you do that? Well, a little bit of more research, and I was humbled to find that yes, you don't want to only be living there and doing that only as your practice, depending on your nervous system, doesn't necessarily ensure that you are going to get rid of accrued stress or that you're going to make systemic change in the body, but it can be very helpful before certain activities to induce a more transcendent state. Like if you are, in a sound meditation and you want to absorb the overtones of the instruments before you, putting yourself into a certain state due to that more active breath work or a rebirthing type of breath, that can actually be pretty effective than to be in a state where you can receive the sound more efficiently so that you can be taken into a more meditative or relaxed state. Same thing in other activities where, maybe you're going to be doing certain kind of yoga or partner yoga. It can be very helpful to have that activation so that then when you do go to bring the body down, that activation has kind of helped get some of the surface level stress up and out. And so the analogy is, physical exercise actually raises cortisol in the body so that the body overall can be more resistant to cortisol elevation and it's more adaptive to it. So we wouldn't say that physical exercise is bad, right? Because we want to exercise, we want to be adaptive and flexible and strong in our bodies. And it's only momentarily raising it so that the body has exposure to it so that when cortisol gets evoked in life, that we can, handle it and absorb it and process it better. Now, meditation is really the ultimate metabolizer of cortisol and all the other stress chemicals. But it is interesting that there is, a certain effect of physical exercise in our ability to handle that. Similarly, active breath work, raises the tolerance for more oxygen in the system so that when we either sit in meditation or other activities where we're using less breath, that our bodies can actually, they basically can deal with both, right? That you can handle lots of carbon dioxide in the body and know what to do with that and be adapted to it, or also be adapted to lots of oxygen in the body, not because you're going to live there, not because you want to always have that over-oxygenated state, but because it gives you greater capacity and greater facility between the two extremes of what the body can handle. And the greater capacity of any instrument, the stronger and the more healthy it is. So how does this all relate to breath is thought is breath is thought? Is that if you're feeling disconnected from yourself, from your breath in activity, it's interesting to notice, where are you breathing? Are you breathing in the middle of a sentence? Are you speaking to the absolute end of your voice so that you start to fry and you can barely, you're just, pinching out the last remnants of air? Are you allowing yourself pauses to let the inhale naturally come in like a wave and out, and then your voice and your thoughts are just naturally living on that exhale? It's a really simple question to ask oneself. Oh, where am I breathing? Am I actually breathing with the punctuation, so to speak, that would most express the content of my heart?